Welcome to Rauta and yet another opinion video especially related to this particular summer or summertime in general. Now a week ago I started this, let's say a new series because I hope to keep up the flame at least for a few episodes talking about metal bands that covered, well, non-metal bands. That is only eligible bands or songs for that matter for this series are songs that were performed originally by a non-metal band. Anything goes really as long as it's not considered metal. Even if it's punk or say rock and roll related, close to metal but not exactly metal. And the previous episode featured top 5 of my favorites or certain like top 5 of my all-time favorites when a metal band did a great cover of certain non-metal songs. Now obviously as more ideas popped into my head, figured out some of those top 5 songs could be really in this particular episode. And later on, thanks to your suggestion as well as other people on Discord server feeding me some nice ideas, well, there will be more interesting choices. But this time I chose these 5 songs just by myself because, well, let's be honest about it, these bands made more or less a big impact on me along the years, some even as far as to my, well, childhood days. So these bands made some interesting covers which are not really metal by definition. So let's go on with them and more interesting choices will be coming later on. Now these are not in any particular order, I'll just go with the flow here and closest I guess I could go is alphabetical order, whatever. No, Anthrax is one of those trash metal bands that is often listed as in Big 4 of American trash metal. And that also is a band that I got to know very, very early on when I was a young teenager and all that stuff. And, you know, learning a lot of something that later on people would be considering extreme metal in general. These being bands that, you know, came to me before, say, death metal and black metal. Now, Anthrax obviously is a band that seems to be dividing people into two segments. People who like me, consider it a great band with great songs and some great covers. But it's also a band that some people say no, I like trash metal, I don't like Anthrax. Now, however, whatever you like, is that they did a nice cover early on in their career, Got the Time, which is originally a Joe Jackson song, you know, decades earlier. Now the funny thing is, Got the Time, if you don't know the original version or if you don't know it to be a cover song in the first place, you might just think it's Anthrax song and all. I mean, it is so very, very well made by Anthrax that you could just really hey, it's not a cover. Oh, it is? And that's how you go on. Now, Joe Jackson's song is something that actually, when you listen to it, I just listened to it recently for this particular video because I wanted to kind of have the comparison in my head, you know, figuring out which version I like more, Anthrax version or Joe Jackson cover. Now, Joe Jackson song is rock and roll, old-fashioned, old school and all that stuff. But if you really think about it, the original, I mean, it kind of sounds very metallic without being metal. It almost reeks that it is something that is supposed to be metalized version. Now, when you listen to it, it might seem a little bit old-fashioned and sound yeah, this is kind of outdated and all that stuff. And then if you compare it to Anthrax session, it suddenly is mind-blowing. This is almost like a proto-trash song, you know, from the time when trash metal didn't even exist, or metal for that matter. Now, obviously, this comes no surprise. I like Anthrax version more. Why so? Well, it's more intense, obviously better production, and of course I like belladonna vocals and all that stuff. And like I said, I'm an Anthrax fan, so I guess kind of goes without saying I prefer that one. But that is not to say Joe Jackson version, the original one, is not good. I mean, there's almost certain element that kind of beckons me to just go for more Joe Jackson. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the time for that at the moment. But yeah, it is really a rock and roll song that kind of almost spells it out. metalize me. That's how nice it is. So definitely, if you haven't never listened to it, go for YouTube or whatever streaming service you're using and give it a go. It's an interesting song, and when you compare it to the Anthrax, it makes so much sense that it's indeed metalized. Even older band, even more important for me, is obviously Metallica. That is a band that kind of didn't really define my childhood, but really my early on teenage years. Metallica is one of those bands that I probably wouldn't be into metal in the first place without Metallica. And I know I'm not the only one, of course. I mean, it's the whole generation. Even a lot of, people from death metal and black metal is saying like Metallica is one of those big names. Even if it sounds like you shouldn't be liking those commercial bands. It's like so big, how can you like it? Then again, you could say the same thing about Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and Motorhead. A lot of bands. Let's be honest about it. Metallica is a good band for a lot of reasons, and those reasons are the early years, especially the first decade from 1981 to early 90s. For me personally, the first 4 albums are really, really high on the list of all-time albums for me. Now, this is technically speaking a compilation we're talking about, Garage Inc., which is a, compilation of cover songs. Now, I got to hear it before that. I think it was one of those B-sides, but I just decided to include this as a backdrop because it doesn't really make sense which release I'm showing it to you. It just mentions that, so what, a cover song of a punk band is here among the others. Now, if you take a look, there's quite a bit of songs that Metallica covered and are not originally Metallic ones. So you could choose from a selection of good songs, good cover songs and all that stuff. But like I said, this song came to my mind before any Googling, any, asking around. It's one of those songs that sounded so badass when I was a teenager. And obviously back in the days, I had no idea who was the original performed, but I somehow, figured out it wasn't Metallica song to begin with. It just sounded a little bit different, odd, lyrics-wise and song-wise, but I loved it when I was a kid. It was like, almost putting chest hair to my chest before that was even possible. Anyhow, so originally Anti-Nowhere League, a punk band that you had the middle finger attitude. They were not giving a damn about this and that. And they had a song that was probably very, very offending to a lot of people. Think about the Sex Pistols meets, Venom kind of attitude. And there you have it. It's very, very obscene in terms of lyrics. It's just, not kneeling down, not bowing down. It's just doing it a very, very nice, smirking in your face kind of ways and just not giving a damn. And that's why I like it. I mean, for a teenager, reading those lyrics was so badass. Something similar than when you read the first black metal albums or death metal albums, but in a different way. Of course, this comes from a punk background, and a lot of black metal and death metal bands also have been influenced by punk. I mean, if you ever read anything about Mayhem, for instance, you obviously know this. So it's not really a surprise that bands like Metallica were inspired by that and made that cover really, really powerful version. Now, prior to this video, once again, I gave this Anti-Nowhere League original version of So What a chance. And of course, it sounds like what you would expect from the 1970s, 1980s era kind of stuff. I don't exactly know when this song was originally done, and it didn't matter in terms of this video. What matters to me is that Metallica made a really, really good cover. So good a cover that whatever I said about Anthrax making a good cover of that Joe Jackson song is paling in comparison to So What. It's, in my opinion, a so good cover version that it fits Metallica perfect. It's like the band is having fun. They're using the obscene language in a way that you just can't nothing but, hell yeah. This is a one really, really good song. James Hetfield vocals fitting perfectly. And how the song is played, it's so much more powerful than a little bit sloppy punk song back in the days. So if it's anything, it's a really, really good cover song. Now, mentioning that, I could say yeah, some other covers made by Metallica made really a big impact to me back in the days, including Killing Time and, of course, Stone Cold Crazy, so Queen and other bands. But we're not talking about here. It's like I said, one song by band, one band, and this is my favorite punk cover of all times, pretty much, give or take. Now, one thing that I learned later on was that Satyricon from Norway decided to cover Turbonegro, a death punk band also from Norway. However, for whatever reason, I couldn't find that song in any of these releases by Satyricon. Maybe it wasn't released, or maybe Metal Archives isn't listing that for a reason or two. Maybe it's somewhere hidden around here, but the search function for songs didn't list it, so okay, I give up. I know it exists and you can really find it on YouTube, for instance, but if you're looking for a certain release to find that song, I don't know, maybe it doesn't exist, or maybe it's just a bootleg. Whatever, doesn't really matter. What matters is that I'm not a fan of early Turbonegro, but I'm a fan of their later works. Somewhere along the lines in the 90s, late 90s or so, Turbonegro started changing their style in a way that I started really, really liking them a lot. Not only for the music, but also the lyrics and the ways, the whole band keeps flowing on with the message and style and all that stuff. Having fun, having still the kind of a punky rock and roll attitude, not giving a fuck. And so it was kind of surprising that Satyricon of all bands decided to do Turbonegro cover. I mean, it's fun. The very same way that Metallica or Anthrax are doing that, or Mayhem for that matter, covering punk or something along the line on this video later on. But still, it was a little bit surprising that they went for I Got Erection. Now, I like the original song, and I like the version Satyricon did. So, unlike Metallica Anthrax case, where it's easy to say for me, yeah, I like Metallica version more than the original one, I like the Anthrax version more than the original one. For me, in this case, I don't know, maybe Turbonegro original version, talks to me more than Satyricon cover. But I like it also how Satyricon made it like their own. I mean, it's obvious it's not their own song. When you listen to it, this doesn't sound a Satyricon song. But there's still the kind of a era from the 1990s that Satyricon had there. Like, yeah, this actually made sense. Or is it early 2000s? I really don't know and care at this point. But I'm saying it's kind of a funny because it doesn't sound something like Satyricon would do. And at the same time, yeah, after Rebel Extravaganza or whatever, maybe that's exactly what they wanted to do and needed to do. Kind of challenge the very basics, the very foundation of black metal. Like, we don't give a fuck. We grew up with punk and heavy metal and whatever. So we're going to do this despite if you like it or not. Anyway, both versions are good, but maybe this time I have to say the original version is better. But that is maybe because I like Turbonegro on average, maybe even more than Satyricon. Well, except the early stuff. Hard to compare because they're two different bands and I like two different eras so much. But anyway, give those both versions a go. It's worth your time. Now this comes as a surprise to, I guess, a lot of people following Rauta. What the hell Sentenced is doing here and why it's here with the cover. Now, mind you, this was when I was ending my military service. I think it was the very same day I went to the record store when I walked out of the army. I bought Love and Death EP from Sentenced, which was released already in September, and I think I got out, goddamn, I don't know for sure, but I think it was October or November probably. So this was quite fresh in the oven, and since I liked Amok album a lot, and this came after that, it was like, obviously, I need to have the new Sentenced. So I got this EP and I liked, but I was surprised they had Billy Idol cover. Never been exactly fan of that, Billy Idol face. But I'll give credit to the man. He has some good song, and this is not the only one, mind you, but just one of the good songs he made. And Sentenced did a great cover. Once again, much like the bands previously mentioned, Sentenced made the cover on some of their own. So at the same time, obviously get the Billy Idol vibes, but you also get the Sentenced vibes. I mean, it's like a very Finnish darkened version of Billy Idol going on. And I must say, while I do like the, especially nowadays, Billy Idol song, maybe in a way I like Sentenced even more. But that is just because it's heavier, it's more metallic, and it's darker. Billy Idol could have had kind of a metallic take on general, but I mean, of course, it's rock and roll. Nothing wrong with that, but it's no metal, so it counts for this series and all. White Wedding is so fitting of Sentenced during this era. It sounds like what Sentenced really was. A song for their transition phase. I mean, because after Amok and Love and Death, the bands changed even more when Daniel Jarvo went out of the band and they kind of had their new sound. So it was quite fitting. Love and Death is almost like a kind of a name that is very, very fitting. End of an era. A death, but also kind of a bringing the love into the game. Anyway, this White Wedding cover works perfectly in my opinion, and much like Therion in the previous episode doing ABBA cover, makes so much sense, and you cannot nothing but say like, wow, they really made a nice version of that. I mean, it's easier to do a metallic cover of a punk song, in my opinion, to make a little bit cheesy rock and roll song into metal version. I mean, of course you could say, yeah, your rock and roll turns to metal music so easily, but that's not always so given. Anyway, both songs are good, but this time I like the cover version more. And then we go to the last of the pile, also the weirdest song of the pile, and this is from a compilation album, Soundtrack to the Apocalypse by Slayer, my all-time favorite band. And when I got this version, I mean, of course, it was mandatory for me to have this 3 CD box. Why? Because there are these, well, rare versions of songs. I don't know if I would buy it nowadays, even with the 4, disc being DVD and all. But back in the day, it was like, there's nothing like, no need to think about it. You just buy it. Why? It's your favorite band, for fuck's sake. So they had this song called Inagata da Vida, made by Iron Butterfly. Here it is on the second disc, and that is some old school rock and roll. I mean, it's kind of the Doors kind of a vibe what you have here going on. When you listen to the original version, it's kind of like a hippie rock going on. I can already like hear it in my head when I'm talking about it. So I like the original version because it's kind of a Doors like, but it's no metal, man. It's just something different. So when Slayer picked their guitars and drums and shit and started metalizing the whole song, it's like, man, they make it rock. Because, of course, Slayer is known for their very intense playing style, even if they go full mid-tempo. They don't have to blast through it. They make it sound feral, heavy, metallic, and feral. And that kind of a beast, what they made of this Iron Butterfly song is just so fantastic. Because obviously you realize when you're listening to it, you realize it's no Slayer song. I mean, it's that obvious. But then again, how they made the cover, much like Anthrax with the Joe Jackson one, it's like, man, I dig it. So if you listen both versions once again, you will hear the contrast between a non-metallic rock song and a metalized version of the same rock song. And while they both are good, obviously, for me, Slayer wins the game. So, to sum it up, the whole episode here, much like the previous episode, I just chose one original version beating the cover versions. And this has a lot to do with me liking the band so much. So, much like this episode, Anthrax, Metallica, Sentenced and Slayer, doing the better versions for me anyway, because I like them all as bands. I like a certain era when these songs were made. Well, the original versions, none of these are bad by no means. I just like the new versions more, with the only exception of the Satyricon and Turbonegro thing where the original version just works better for me. Now, I urge you to check out all these songs. If you don't, fine by me, but I think this is some good summertime shit to do. Check out some new bands you might not even heard of, and these new songs, new bands, Of course, they're old as fuck. So you need to dig into the history. And of course, you will find all these songs on YouTube, more likely also on streaming versions. So give it a go and let the cover versions be heard. They're good ones, make no mistake. But what lies for episode 3? Gonna be something I haven't heard, so we'll see how it's gonna be next time. Now, off you go, see you soon, and keep making these suggestions for coming episode of metal bands doing a non-metal cover. Off you go, bye bye.